Hey everyone, today we're diving into something that affects millions of successful people, but hardly anyone talks about openly. And that's why high achievers burn out despite being disciplined, capable, and seemingly having it all together. If you've ever felt exhausted to your core, even though you're crushing your goals, or if you know someone who's always juggling a million responsibilities, but seems perpetually drained, this video is for you. So stick around because what I'm about to share might completely change how you think about success and energy. The problem starts with what I call the software bug in most high achievers, which is this deeply ingrained belief that if I just try harder, I'll feel better. When high performers recognize they're tired, their first instinct is to respond with more discipline, more optimization, more productivity, more intense workouts, basically more pressure on themselves. But here's the truth bomb that most people don't want to hear. You're not a robot, you're human, and an eternal orientation towards more simply isn't sustainable in the long run. The real issue, and this is based on working with thousands of high performers over nearly 2 decades, is that high achievers burn out because they chronically abandon themselves. They override their emotions, ignore their bodies, betray their boundaries, and numb their subtle discomforts with drugs, alcohol, achievement, or endless hustling. And while that might boost your bottom line for a season, it's absolutely not maintainable for life. High achievers say yes when their body desperately wants to say no. They push through exhaustion with caffeine, nicotine, sometimes Adderall, and pure ego-fueled willpower. They stay in misaligned relationships and careers just to sustain an identity that's no longer true for them. And they have an incredibly difficult time taking any form of rest without guilt or emotional resistance eating them alive. Now you might be wondering why high achievers are especially prone to this self-abandonment pattern, and it goes back to childhood. Most high achievers were praised for performance as children, for what they did or achieved, not for who they were at their core, not for their essence as human beings. They learned from a very young age that they were lovable and worthwhile only when they were competent. So naturally, they did what anyone would do in that situation. They became capable, dependable, the emotional anchor, the impressive one in every room. The more they suppressed their true needs so they could keep up the endless winning streak, the more love and validation they seemed to receive, so they kept it up for life, building their entire identity around holding it all together and essentially being perfect. So when a high achiever starts feeling burned out, it's not a personal or moral failure, even though it absolutely feels like one to that long-established high-performing identity. It's actually just your heart, body, and soul desperately asking for more room at the table of your life. Let's talk about the nervous system science behind burnout for a moment, because this is fascinating. When you constantly override your body's internal signals, your nervous system shifts into chronic sympathetic activation, which is just a fancy way of saying your body is always stressed, always in fight or flight mode. And that's incredibly hard on your physical system. This kind of chronic stress is especially a modern ailment because thousands of years ago, a lion might chase you and be a genuine short-term threat. But that lion didn't sit down near you and lunge at you every 5 minutes for decades on end without actually eating you. Yet that's exactly what chronic identity-level stress feels like for high achievers. Except instead of an external lion, it's like every single time you try to rest, your inner slave driver cracks the whip and screams at you to get moving, calling you lazy, telling you there's no time to rest. By the time burnout actually hits, your body has usually been sending warning signals for months, if not years. You've been running on cortisol and adrenaline, which you've mistakenly been interpreting as energy, and eventually the whole house of cards just collapses, which can be especially devastating for an identity that's felt bulletproof for so long. Ultimately, burnout is your body's desperate attempt to restore safety to your system. So if signing up for another ultramarathon or setting new, big, hairy, audacious goals isn't the answer, what actually is? Here's what genuine recovery and healing from burnout actually looks like. It's slowing down for long enough to get genuinely curious about your deeper needs. It's listening to the things you haven't allowed yourself to have or experience in a very long time. It's slowly dissolving or reprioritizing different aspects of your identity that no longer serve you in this coming season of life. It's progressively questioning and releasing a default, obligation-driven way of living. It's making real, time for rest, play, hobbies, and true nourishment. And it's allowing yourself to receive and let in just as much as you constantly give, produce, and provide for everyone else. Now, let me be crystal clear about what I'm not saying here. I'm not telling you to buy another dozen supplements to add to your supplement graveyard. I'm not saying you need to take a 3-day vacation and you'll magically be good as new. And I'm definitely not suggesting you should continue hustling at the exact same breakneck pace, but just get better at taking 10-second intentional breathing breaks throughout your day. Most things high achievers do to try to right the ship are just superficial band-aid fixes that don't address the root cause. They're the equivalent of just drink a triple shot espresso and get back to grinding. And with that mindset, absolutely nothing changes in the long run. What's actually needed is a death. And I mean that metaphorically, obviously, a death of aspects of your old default ways of operating that no longer serve you. If you genuinely want sustainable transformation and a real cessation of the burnout cycle, some fundamental things in your life are going to have to change, because otherwise it'll just be more of the same patterns, but over time they'll actually get worse. This brings us to choosing alignment over achievement, which is the real paradigm shift. The old way of thinking says life works when I work, but the new way of thinking recognizes that everything in my life becomes more potent and powerful when I stop abandoning myself and start honoring my true needs. When a high achiever actually stops the default self-betrayal pattern and starts setting clean boundaries, stops hustling for an inner sense of worth, they begin to feel deeper and more sustainable levels of peace, energy, and creativity than they ever thought possible. Their relationships improve dramatically, both personal and professional ones, and their ambition becomes grounded and intentional instead of frantic and fear-driven. Essentially, everything in their life improves because they're no longer being driven by fear, scarcity, and lack, but instead by peace, faith, trust, and genuine self-compassion for their human limitations. So remember this, you're not broken, you're just done living out of alignment with your true self, and every single high achiever eventually hits this crossroads at some point in their journey. Your most powerful, fulfilling, and sustainable life begins the moment you finally stop abandoning yourself and start treating yourself like the valuable human being you actually are, not just a productivity machine that exists to achieve and impress others. If this message resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more content on personal growth and sustainable success, and drop a comment below telling me what your biggest takeaway was from this video, because I'd love to hear how this perspective lands for you and whether you've experienced burnout in your own high-achieving journey.